3, 2, 1.
Good question to ask ourselves. How long has this been going on? Well, today I want to introduce our talk. I want to begin my talk by giving a spoiler alert. If you have not read, excuse me one sec, if you have not read this book or some version of this book, I'm sure that it comes in different covers. U.S. Anderson's book, The Three Magic Words. Spoiler alert, but it's good for you to hear now. He starts the 12th and final chapter, which he calls The Key, with this quote: "That which from self made each mortal, self unto each mortal must be. Thus the key that unlocks the portal to God is thyself. Thou art he." Now, let's get past the whole he-genter identification habit of old. We know what Anderson is talking about. The next line in this chapter is the big one. What 233 previous pages have been leading up to, in all caps, block letters, are these three words. You are God, with the word you in italics. You are God. How does that make you feel? Give yourself a second. How does that feel to hear me say, and to hear you hear, hear yourself hear the words, you are God? Now, today happens to be National Comfy Day. And as you probably heard, the affirmative incantation this week is about being comfy. This talk, though, may make some of you not feel so comfy. What do you think about your identity as God? I know that can be a tough one. I really know that can be a tough one, especially if you haven't been in this philosophy for very long. Really? I am God? What kind of thing is that to say? Now, one of the titles this book has had is The Key to Power. The book is about the unlimited power that is yours, and we talk about this pretty much every week. And it's also about how you can turn this power, which we talk about every week, to work for you here on earth to make your life majestic and overflowing with good. The author, U.S. Anderson, stresses it's not a religious or a sect. It's not a religion or a sect or a society that he is writing about. It is not such a thing that we're speaking about. It's a philosophy. Yes, a lot of these ideas come from this book, as well as the Science of Mind book, and many books that I love to use, and my own ideas that pop up that are inspired. He says it is a series of essays aimed at revealing to you your power over all things. Great book. I love this book. One of the books I really, really love in this teaching and this idea. Do you remember the story, and I've told it a few times, about the couple that have had a new baby recently, and it's their second child. And when they brought the infant back from the hospital, they introduced their 2-year-old son to his new little sibling. And the 2-year-old lifted the blanket to look at the new infant, and it was a girl. And he then looked up at his parents and he says, "I want to talk to the baby by myself," in his 2-year-old way. And parents weren't really thrilled about that idea, so they distracted him somehow so they could put it off. I mean, they were thinking, we're not going to leave a 2-year-old with an infant. But those words, that statement became a mantra for this little boy. Every day I want to talk to the baby by myself. He was pretty adamant, as especially 2-year-olds can be. So the parents thought, well, we should give this serious thought. And they actually went out and sought professional help. And with that help, they came up with a plan. And the plan was that they would place walkie-talkies in the baby's room and one in the room next door. And then they would allow the 2-year-old in the baby's room and be able to listen to what was going on. So the parents set it up, and many of you parents probably have done that. You put the little baby monitors in there. But before they let the 2-year-old in there, they gave him a few precautions about the baby being fragile and to be careful, et cetera, et cetera. And all the time, the 2-year-old's just looking at them with this, yeah, got it, Mom. Look. So finally, they said their piece and they decided, okay, well, it's time to do it. And they led the 2-year-old in the room and left him next to the crib. And then they dashed over to the next room and started to listen in case of an emergency. So first they heard the little boy. There was carpeting on the floor. They heard the little boy, step up, crawl up to what sounded like a chair. They heard his feet on the carpet and then heard him climbing up on the chair. And then they heard the rustling of the blankets that was over the infant. And that stiffened them a bit. They were a little concerned. What's going on? Is he touching? Is he trying to pick her up? But then they heard a question. They heard him speaking. And the little boy, in just a whisper, but a firm yet loving tone, he said to his little sister, newborn sister, "Tell me about God. I'm starting to forget." Have you forgotten? Have you been lost behind that lock that becomes forged by our upbringings, our memories that are lodged in the subconscious somewhere, the witnessing or experiencing of any pain or discomfort or struggle or dis-ease or hunger or trauma throughout your life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? We all have, actually, to some degree. But behind this lock, I want to remind you that behind this lock is veiled. Well, we are veiled. When we are behind it, when we allow ourselves to continue to be behind this lock, we are veiled from the truth. And the veil is a hell of sorts. The veil is a shadow of our best selves. The veil honors and supports any lack and limitation or fear and regret. It isolates us from our magnificence. The veil that we allow to show up tunes us away from love, peace, our power, and our grace. W.E.B. Du Bois was an American historian and sociologist. He specialized in a structural analysis of social inequalities, and he was this intellectual with a PhD from Harvard and a prolific author and civil rights activist. In fact, he was a leader not only in the NAACP, but of what was called the Niagara Movement, which was an organization of Black intellectuals that called for full political, civil, and social rights for African Americans, which, of course, there shouldn't have to be such an organization. But anyway, we celebrate his birthday this week. And in his 1935 book called Black Reconstruction in America, he wrote this: "Beneath the veil lay right and wrong, vengeance and love, and sometimes throwing aside the veil a soul of sweet beauty and truth stood revealed. Beneath or behind the veil, the diagnosis of our lives is more grim than good. Beneath or behind the veil, the symptoms include more fear than faith, more struggling than thriving. And the prognosis of living behind that veil, of being locked behind that veil without any intervention, is false mental habits always being at the ready, almost at every turn. Conceptual habits of the subconscious stepping into the conscious. Like these phrases, I am less than, I am never ready, and the greatest block to one discovering oneself and expressing their magnificence, woe is me, the victim. Now, I'm not talking about the rare occasion of an accident, an argument, or any temporary adversity. I'm talking about our self-talk. Listen to your self-talk. That's your symptom in the diagnosis. And the question I ask in this talk is, what's your diagnosis? Listen to your self-talk. That's your symptom and the inevitable result for your prognosis. I could cry salty tears. Where have I been all these years? Little wow, tell me now. How long has this been going on? So what's the remedy? What's the medicine? What's the treatment for this diagnosis? Well, one, most importantly, don't despair. At least not for more than a minute or two. You're allowed to have your emotions, but don't give up. No matter how long this has been going on, don't give up. Stop the regret. That's living in the past. Stop the worry. That's living in the future. Be in the now. Right here, right now. As George Washington, whose birthday we celebrate tomorrow, said, truth will ultimately prevail where there is pains to bring it to light. Now, I don't want to advocate, and I don't advocate that we have to live through some pain to get to the light. I know you read about that in many books and articles about being enlightened, stepping into enlightenment. But don't think that you have to go through pain to become enlightened, though most of us do. We don't have to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune to stop and take the time to discover the luminescence of the universe. But many of us have, and that's okay. Each of us must be our own crisis negotiator during these pains and discomforts that can illuminate. But only you can decide what's not working with yourself. Now, others may point it out, and you may go to a professional to help you point it out, and that's fine and great. But we must pick up the prescription after that diagnosis and take the medicine. Only you can decide what is working in your life, what is working in your perspective, in your mind, in your revelation of your divine self. Again, we may need others to point those out, but we must be the ones who continue those practices, who continue those thoughts, that self-talk. Now, in the famous soliloquy from Hamlet, called the To Be or Not To Be Soliloquy, Hamlet contemplates whether to live at all. But in the soliloquy of your life, the question is whether 'tis nobler to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, of the pains, troubles, and junk life has brought, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. Opposing them by using the medicine of who we are, what we believe, and what is the truth. Now, sometimes bringing oneself to light ain't fun. I get it. I've experienced it. But the pain you have suffered mentally, maybe even physically, is not in vain. Again, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, now is the acceptable time, not tomorrow, not some more convenient season. It is today that our best work can be done, and not some future day or future year. Believe in life, he says. Always human beings will live and progress to greater, broader, and fuller life. When they believe in life, when they believe in their power, when you believe that you can and you are revealing the divinity in you. And let us not only just lift the veil, but remove it. Let us, as U.S. Anderson wrote in his book, Three Magic Words, accept the towering truth, dare to stand atop this magnificent pinnacle. Let us rise together as one and as the one in many, and know, as was written in the Upanishads, the personal self and the ultimate imperishable impersonal self are one. Let me read that again slowly. The personal self and the ultimate imperishable impersonal self, the universe, life, the divine, the power and presence, spirit, are one. Are one. Or as it's written in the Vedanta, not a part, not a mode of that, but identically that absolute spirit of the world. Let me do a little Bible here. Genesis 1:27 says, and God created the human in its image. In the image of God, it created them, male and female. It created them. Now, the important Hebrew word in that phrase, if you read it in the Hebrew, is tselem. Tselem, which means to carve or cut. But also, it means a resemblance or representation, an authority, a creative power. Those are the attributes of the divine. The image is not about what it looks like, body, face, arms, hands, fingers, toes, but what it is, what God is, what it can do, what the universe does. It creates. We are creators with the ability to reach into the infinite possibilities of the universe and pick what we want to show up. And how do we do that? We do that by having the havingness of that, the consciousness of that, the description of that in our hearts, in our minds, and our guts. An imagination of what it feels like, tastes like, tactily, smells like, sounds like, in thought, feeling, and belief. First century Arab Gnostic named Maimonides tells us this. Abandon the search for God, he says. Instead, take yourself as the starting place. I love that. Abandon the search for God. Instead, take yourself as the starting place, because that's where the divine is. That's where God is, right here, in the starting place. And Ernest Holmes, who wrote the book Science of Mind, reminds us we never shall encompass God, and yet we shall always be in God and of God. That's why we can start here. Don't start out there in the universe. Start right here. Right here. Right here where you can really reveal the divinity that's already there. If we continually bear the symptoms of being locked away from our divinity, we shall continue to bar ourselves behind lack and limitation. And I don't mean just about money, lack and limitation in any part of our lives, in our body temple, as well as in our pocketbook. in our careers, in our relationships. Mind. I'm going to remind you, I've said this a million times. I can feel it coming out of my mouth that I've said it a million times. Mind is consciousness. Mind is an intelligence, and there's only one mind expressing itself as your mind and my mind, but it's all God's mind, or whatever you want to call it. You don't have to call it God. If you don't like that word, fine. But whatever you call it, this is an energy, a power, a presence that is limitless and ever-present, creative and authoritative. If there are any symptoms of lack or dis-ease in your life, be your own doctor, be your own counselor, be your own therapist and crisis negotiator. And that doesn't mean you don't seek out help if you want to. You can call the office and one of us will get back to you and know the truth for you and remind you that you're revealing the divinity right now. That doesn't mean you don't seek out help, but in the end, you must remember it is you revealing the divine within you. It is you who must actively listen to yourself, your self-talk, your thoughts and feelings, and have compassion and gain understanding of where you're coming from. Without judgment, without wallowing in the past, and allow yourself to have rapport with and trust with yourself and your intuition and the faith that you have in the power and presence that is within you right now. And solidify your spiritual practices, whatever you choose them to be, and enjoy the awareness of the positive influence they have on your perspective, beliefs, thoughts, and feelings, even if they're little. One step at a time sometimes, most times even. I think the Buddha would say all times, one step at a time. And celebrate those steps, no matter how small. Because with your mental behavioral changes, your thoughts and feelings, the changes in your perspective, in the working of it, you will act to attract into your life the physical manifestations of the positive, constructive, illuminated thoughts you are choosing to think. Not just letting go by because of some stupid thing somebody said to you that you decided you wanted to believe. For many of us, it's our parents. You don't have to believe that stuff anymore. You're your own person. You are divine right here, right now. As U.S. Anderson said, you are God. Emily Cady wrote a book called How I Used Truth, God's Hand. And in it she said, there is but one hand in the universe. It is God's hand. Whenever you have felt that your hand was empty, it is because you have believed yourself something separate from God. If you have ever felt that your hand was empty, it is because you have believed yourself something separate from God. Your hand is God's hand, she said. My hand is God's hand. It reaches out through its only hands, to give its gifts. So what's your diagnosis? What's your diagnosis? I trust it is, or soon will be, just like mine, magnificent. Thank you so much. Namaste.